That's what it is.
Present us, O Lord, in all our doings with thy most gracious favor, and further us with thy continual help, that in all our works begun, continued, and ended in thee, we may glorify thy holy name, and finally, by thy mercy, attain everlasting life. Amen. I recognize the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask for leave to make a statement regarding the National Day of Mourning for workers killed or injured on the job. Mr. Speaker, as part of this, the member for Saskatoon Centre will join me in reading the names into the record.
Ministers ask leave. Is leave granted? Recognize the Minister.
Today marks the last sitting day before the National Day of Mourning for workers killed or injured on the job. This year, Day of Mourning is on Sunday, April 28th, and I want to make sure that my colleagues and the people of Saskatchewan have the opportunity to recognize that day while we are still in the House. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to welcome everyone in the galleries and those who are watching from home who are joining us today to hear the names of their loved ones being read. Please accept my personal condolences and the condolences on behalf of the Government of Saskatchewan. On the day of mourning, our thoughts will be with the families, friends, and colleagues of those who lost someone to a workplace injury or illness. We will also be thinking of those who have experienced workplace illnesses and injuries. I would encourage everyone to find some small way to recognize the day of mourning. It could be stopping for a quiet moment to reflect on the lives that have been lost. It could be just having some quiet thoughts, or wearing an armband or ribbon. It could be laying a wreath, or attending one of the vigils that will be organized in communities across the province. At the Legislature, our flags will fly at half-mast, as they will in many buildings throughout the province and the country. Regardless of how you mark the day, please remember to reflect on how each of us can make our workplaces safer and healthier for ourselves and our colleagues. Mr. Speaker, workplace illnesses, injuries, and fatalities have a tremendous impact on families, workplaces, and communities. Last year, the Workers' Compensation Board accepted 48 claims for workplace-related deaths in the province. This is an unacceptably high number. We need to honour the memories of those we have lost by making a daily commitment to keeping ourselves and each other safe in our homes, communities, and workplaces. Mr. Speaker, I would ask that all members rise while we read the names of those who have lost their lives while at work or due to workplace injuries and illness. Daryl Morrison, Alessandro Mazzini, Wilmer Pizzi, Malcolm MacDonald, Anthony Slager, Megan Miller, Shane Hartel, Felino Estianslo, Dale Schwabe, Wade Bai, Daryl Matusko, Joseph Ryan, Larry Enns, Reuben Penner, Gregory Zerf, Robert Duhane, Alfred Pelche, Wasil Predenchuk, Joseph Cook, Lionel Dubray, Mary Louise Clausen. Member for Saskatoon Centre has names.
Glenn Dirksen, Darcy Hogan, Dana Bronze, Tyler Bieber, Mark Cross, August Liniak, Brian Beer, Lisa Zerb, Lawrence Coban, Robert Curtis, Brian Messit, Shali Esplin, Julian Pichard, Richard Hebert, Jill Severo, Niels Angals, Daniel Hill, Mervyn Holtman, Arthur Brown, Kenneth McConnell, Mohammed Savras, Howard Wood, Douglas Carrick, Simon Grant, Javian Chevalier, Harlan Big.
Mr. Speaker, not included in the list are the estimated 13 people who lost their lives working on Saskatchewan farms and ranches each year. Again, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Government of Saskatchewan, I extend our condolences to everyone who lost a loved one. I would now ask that we observe a moment of silence to commemorate the day of mourning. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I have two documents to table. One is in accordance to Section 23(1, the Public Interest Disclosure Act, the Public Interest Disclosure Commissioner Annual Report of 2018, from the Ombudsman Mary McFadden, and I've got, in accordance to subsection 38(1, the Ombudsman Act, the Ombudsman Saskatchewan Annual Report 2018 from Mary McFadden. Thanks. Introduction of guests. I recognize the member for Regina Walsh-Acres.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to you and through you, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce a group up in the gallery that joins us from 4-H. 4-H offers a wide variety of opportunities to its members, such as travel, scholarships, improving leadership ability, building communication and judging skills, and expanding knowledge. With us here today is Jody Schellenberg, the Program and Communication Specialist, Sarah Youngson, Executive Director, Melody Hawksford-Lee, the Southeast Regional Specialist, along with 16 participants with their parents from South Saskatchewan, including Melville, Craven, Moose Jaw, and Glen Ewan. They are here as part of the 4-H Citizenship Day. The 2019 event will focus on provincial government. This program is dedicated to understanding governance from the club to parliamentary level by learning about club management, parliamentary procedure, and participating in debate, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to end with a pledge that they all know well. I pledge my head to clear thinking, my heart to larger service, my health to better living for my club, my community, and my country. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Join me in joining them today.
Hear, hear. I recognize the member for Regina Northeast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to join with the member from Walsh-Acres in welcoming the 4-H youths and their leaders, and as well as Jody to their legislature today. It'll be my pleasure to join them later this afternoon as they participate in Citizenship Day and participate in their debates. And Mr. Speaker, perhaps while I'm on my feet, I'd also like to welcome 25 grade 4 and 5 students from Henry Braun School, which is from my constituency. They're seated in the East Gallery, Mr. Speaker, and they're accompanied by their teacher, Christy Lux, as well as parent chaperones, Mrs. Thompson, Mrs. Dureau, Mrs. Schuss, and Mrs. Lavalley. Mr. Speaker, I'll be pleased to meet with these students after the assembly and hope that they enjoy their experience here today, and ask all members to join with me in welcoming them to their legislature.
Recognize the Minister of Energy and Resources.
Extended introduction, Mr. Speaker.
Ministers ask leave for an extended introduction. Is leave granted? Recognize the Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to introduce Ingrid Calder, whose 100th birthday is coming up on April 24th. Ingrid, if you could give everyone a wave. As her daughter Connie Calder, the well-known musician and a treasure to this province, has said, Ingrid has seen Saskatchewan from the age of the horse and buggy to the age of the internet. Her parents, who came from Norway, homesteaded outside Davidson, where Ingrid grew up, raised by her mother, who was widowed when she was a baby. Ingrid was a teacher in a one-room school and is an artist in her own right. She started her career with Kenderdine at Emma Lake and went on to get her BFA at the University of Regina. She still lives in her own house. She Skypes, negotiates the internet, makes the best Saskatoon berry in the world, pie in the world, and as her daughter also says, is generally amazing to us all. She is joined here today by her daughter Connie, as well as Thane Malabar and Gabriel Campaign. Mr. Speaker, please join me in wishing Ingrid Calder the best birthday ever and in welcoming her to her Legislative Assembly.
Recognize a member for Saskatoon Centre.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to join the member in welcoming the Calders to their legislature and congratulating Mrs. Calder on reaching what a milestone. 100 years is a beautiful thing, and it's a wonderful thing that you've seen so much in Saskatchewan. And to all the family and Connie, and I know that everyone here, we think of Connie and her wonderful singing, how she represents Saskatchewan across Canada. So thank you all, and congratulations on your 100th birthday. Thank you.
Recognize the member for John Rosemont.
Request leave for extended introduction.
Members requested leave for an extended introduction. Is leave granted? Recognize the member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a tremendous honor to welcome guests and leaders that are joining us in your assembly here today. Wahi Guru Jika Khalsa, Wahi Guru Ji Ki Fateh. We have leaders, community builders within the Sikh Society of Saskatchewan here today, from the leaders within the Gurdwara, leaders from the temple, Sikh Canadians that have built and bettered our province for generations, Mr. Speaker, and a growing community. They're here today for an important day, the introduction of a bill that's titled a Sikh Heritage Month Act, Mr. Speaker. This group's also here at a very special time, and we wish them a very happy Vaisakhi right now, Mr. Speaker, a religious festival, also a harvest festival, Mr. Speaker, and we look forward to joining with our very proud community for the Sikh Day Parade in just a few weeks, where we'll have literally thousands of people on the streets of Regina and outside the legislature here, Mr. Speaker. I'm thankful, and we're thankful for the commitment of the Sikh community to many things, but equality and social justice and community service, Mr. Speaker, to gender equality, and something that's important, I know, to this community, to note that the women, the leaders that are here today, that it's in a relationship that's equal, Mr. Speaker. And this is a community that knows how to give back like few others, Mr. Speaker, hosting things like a free kitchen in North Central for those that need a meal, Mr. Speaker, every single Sunday. A group that's recently been out, I think on Monday this week, offering a meal to students at the University of Regina, a group that's been long supporters of the Queen City Marathon, Mr. Speaker. I know that relationship well, as I've run through that station, Mr. Speaker, with the best music pumping and incredible energy and color, Mr. Speaker. We're joined here today by leadership within the community, with President Bill Singh of the Sikh Society of Saskatchewan. His family actually came to the province in 1962, originally a principal in the southeast in Unger, Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. We're joined as well by Vice President Sarjit Singh, a business person within our community. And we're here with so many, I can't go through the whole list that are here that are builders of the community and contribute to all facets of our province. When you look at those that have the Sikh community in our province, many came in the 1960s, or I should say a few came at first in the 1960s and 70s as teachers and in medicine, Mr. Speaker. And we have some of those founders here today. We have Mr. Sohan Singh Matharu, Mr. Speaker, He drove from Vancouver in 1976 with who became the first president, Mr. Ajit Singh Matter, Mr. Speaker. They founded the Sikh Society in 1978, and Mr. Sohan Singh Mathur has given back to his province in enormous ways. He has given $10,000 to the University of Regina to support scholarships for those with some learning challenges, Mr. Speaker. He's given $5,000 to the Red Cross. He's currently donating 551 trees to be planted on the banks of the Wascana Creek, Mr. Speaker, in the southeast of Regina. He donated $150,000 to the Gurdwara, the new Gurdwara, the proud and important place to gather, Mr. Speaker. And this story isn't unique. We have people like Mr. Shocker of Moose Jaw, who donated $100,000 to the Moose Jaw Hospital, Mr. Speaker. These are people I'd like to thank and recognize. I'd like to recognize the Granthi as well, the faith leader within the community, Darshan Singh, that's here. This is the glue of this faith community, a faith community that puts their values into action, Mr. Speaker, and I thank and welcome him for his presence. And I welcome as well support to the Granthi, and a very important support to the children, Mr. Ram Singh, Mr. Speaker, who's joined us here today. I could go on further, Mr. Speaker, but I know what I want to express is that all of us in this Assembly, on behalf of the official opposition, but all the people of Saskatchewan, that we're so thankful for their leadership within our province, their commitment to build and better our province, and I thank them for being here today as we introduce this important bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the Minister of Parks, Culture and Sport.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to join the member opposite in welcoming members of the Sikh community. Their contribution to our province is unquestioned over many, many decades, and currently, as was heard just with the member opposite, and will be into the future. We know April is a very important month to the Sikh community, and that's why earlier this month we had we proclaimed Sikh Heritage Month within the province of Saskatchewan. April 8th, we had dozens and dozens of folks down here to celebrate that. We had a flag-raising ceremony and a ceremony in room 218 and some prayers, and we had a very good time as we celebrated that proclamation and their extensive work in our province, not only in our history, as I mentioned, but currently and into the future. So we sincerely thank them for being here. Welcome, everyone. It's great to see you at your legislature, and I ask all members to help me recognize this valuable group once again.
Recognize a member for Regina Rochdale.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to join with the Minister and the member opposite in welcoming the members of the Sikh community. I've had the honor to be invited into their homes to share beautiful meals, to celebrate weddings and birthdays and births, and so I just thank you so much for including me into your homes, into the temple. Your friendship and the relationship that we have built is greatly treasured by myself and my husband and our family. So thank you so much for coming today to be able to again celebrate time in Saskatchewan where the Sikh community is greatly celebrated by the proclamation that the Minister had undertaken earlier this month. Also to the celebration of Vaisakhi. I know the colors, the celebration, that the celebration is always greatly attended by members across both the city and the wider province, and so I think that each and every one of us feel richer for having the Sikh community be very active within Regina, but also in the province of Saskatchewan. As we say, our province's motto, from many people's strength, and thank you so much for lending your strength to our province.
I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask leave for an extended introduction.
Members asked leave for an extended introduction. Is leave granted? Recognize the member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to start by adding my greetings and thanks to the members of the Sikh community who are here today. Sat Sri Akal, it's great to see you all today. And a special mention of someone who's become a good friend, Mr. Bhajan Brar, known to many in this assembly and a great leader in our community. I also want to, while I'm on my feet, recognize some other guests that are with us today. Mr. Speaker, in your gallery, we see Dr. Shakib Sahab, the Chief Public Health Officer of Saskatchewan. I got to know Dr. Shahab during my time in practice. I also had the pleasure of getting to work with his son, Izan Shahab, who's just finished medical school or just about to finish off to residency, and he worked with me at the Westside Clinic on a fascinating research project on how to find out who was having trouble making it to clinic appointments and how to help people avoid no-shows, make better use of our clinic time, and serve our patients better. So thank you to Dr. Shahab for his service and encouragement to his son in his upcoming residency. I also want to recognize in the East Gallery we have Shane Partridge and Kim Bowden from Saskatoon. Both are involved with Straight Up. Both are leaders in our community working against crime, against violence, working to help people get out of the life of gang violence and find a healthier future. Kim is, of course, also a leader at the national level as part of the Council, Vice Chief of the Council of Aboriginal Peoples. Kim is a leader in our community, Shane is a leader in our community, and it's great to see them here in their legislature today. And while I'm still on my feet, I'll add one more name, which is Julie Sanderson, who is here today. She's the Secretary-Treasurer of the Saskatchewan Federation of Labour. She's President of Canadian Union of Public Workers in Saskatoon, and she is a Saskatoon Meewasin resident. So lots of reasons to love Julie, and all of these people are here with us today. I'd ask all the members to join me in welcoming them warmly to their legislative building.
Here. Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you to this Assembly, I'm very pleased to introduce some guests in your gallery, Mr. Speaker. We have Ian McKenzie, who's a grade 6 student from Regina Christian School. He's here along with his parents, Christiana and Bruce McKenzie, his teacher, Tim Vanderhoof, and his friend, Jacob Taylor. They're also seated with Dr. Shahab, the Chief Medical Officer of Saskatchewan, and Colleen Book from the Ministry of Health. Mr. Speaker, Ian has done an outstanding job representing Saskatchewan as the winner of the 2018 Canadian National Immunization Poster Contest. Mr. Speaker, that contest was a great opportunity for students to learn about the importance of immunization and share that knowledge with others. His poster, Dart the Disease, conveys a very positive message about the importance of immunization. We're going to hear more about that in member statements, Mr. Speaker. It was my pleasure to meet with Ian and his guests. We had a bit of a tour of the Assembly. Mr. Speaker, they're here today to help us kick off National Immunization Awareness Week, which is going to run from April 20th to 27th. Mr. Speaker, I would ask all members of the Assembly to help me welcome Ian and all his guests to their Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to join in with the Minister of Health in welcoming the McKenzie family and Dr. Shahab to their Legislative Assembly. In particular, I want to congratulate Ian on being the winner of the poster contest. Immunization is such an important part of public health, and I want to thank all of you for your work on this front, and welcome Ian to his Assembly today.
Recognize a member from Moose Jaw North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as we go into the Easter break, there's a group of people that come, I would say, religiously to the legislature on Thursday. It's the prayer group, and they're in the East Gallery this week. And I just wanted to make sure that they're welcomed here. I wish them a very happy Easter and thank them for their prayers for the Assembly. So if our members would welcome them and thank them, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Recognize the member for Saskatoon Riversdale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to welcome all guests in the gallery, but I'd like to give a special shout out to Shane Partridge, who is a constituent of mine and a tireless volunteer in our community to help improve the lives of folks who live in Saskatoon, Riversdale. He is the safety coordinator for the Pleasant Hill Community Association and was one of the key drivers in bringing together a few hundred people, Mr. Speaker, just a few weeks ago to talk about some of the struggles and challenges we're having in the area. Shane has also been a tireless supporter of those who are living with substance use disorders. He's working at that macro level. He sits as a patient on the Patient and Family Advisory Council for the former Saskatoon Health Authority, now the SHA, Mr. Speaker, and he shares his experience and his knowledge to help improve public policy for all of us, Mr. Speaker. So I'd like to ask all members in thanking Shane for his work and welcoming him to his Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the member for Bigger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, I'd like to introduce 23 students that are seated in the West Gallery. These students are grades 6 and 7, and they're from Maymont Central School. Give us a wave. And they are accompanied by teachers Kirby Arbonneau and Ms. Thompson, and parents Ms. Payne, Mr. Large, and Ms. Vogely. And I look forward to a photo with you and a visit. Please join me in welcoming this group of students from Maymont to their legislature.
Recognize the Minister of Central Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to introduce to you and through you two fine young gentlemen seated in the West Gallery. Zayed Abuhair is a summer student in my office. Just started part-time, and Zayed is studying economics at the University of Regina. Welcome, and we hope that you have a great summer. Joining him is James Cherwick, a new ministerial assistant that started yesterday. James went to the University of Regina and convocated with a degree in kinesiology. We are very excited to have James join our office. On the side, James is also a certified personal trainer. So if any members want to buff up for the summer, we can see James. Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker, and ask all members to welcome them to their Legislative Assembly.
Presenting petitions. Recognize the member for Carrot River Valley.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today to present a petition from citizens who are opposed to the federal government's decision to impose a carbon tax on the province of Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, this tax is being forced on us by a federal government that hasn't a clue about the economic impact it has on Western Canada. In fact, all of Canada. They forgot about the 100,000 plus job losses in Alberta and Saskatchewan due to their war on oil. With Alberta now coming to their senses and getting rid of the NDP, we now have 60% of the population of Canada against the carbon tax. Unfortunately, the leader of the NDP right here in Saskatchewan is in favour of a carbon tax that would devastate our economy. Meanwhile, he promises that if elected, he would spend billions of borrowed dollars putting our balanced budget in jeopardy. Mr. Speaker, this just shows how out of touch the NDP are, not just with Saskatchewan people, but the majority of people in Canada. And that's why he'll never sit on this side of the chamber. I'd like to read the prayer. We in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan take the following action. To cause the government of Saskatchewan to take the necessary steps to stop the federal government from imposing a carbon tax in the province. Mr. Speaker, this petition is signed by the good citizens of Carrot River. I so present.
And as a member for Saskatoon Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present a petition to get big money out of Saskatchewan politics, and the undersigned residents of the province of Saskatchewan want to bring to our attention the following: that Saskatchewan's outdated Election Act allows corporations, unions and individuals, even those living outside Saskatchewan, to make unlimited donations to our province's political parties. You know, Mr. Speaker, that the people of Saskatchewan deserve to live in a fair province where all voices are equal and money can't influence politics. But over the past 10 years, the Saskatchewan Party has received $12.61 million in corporate donations, and of that, $2.87 million came from companies outside Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, simply, Saskatchewan politics should belong to Saskatchewan people. We know that the federal government and the provinces of Alberta, Manitoba, Quebec, Nova Scotia, and now British Columbia have moved to limit this influence and level the playing field by banning corporate and union donations to political parties. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Sask Party government to overhaul Saskatchewan campaign finance laws, to end out-of-province donations, to put a ban on donations from corporations and unions, and to put a donation limit on individual donations. Mr. Speaker, people signing this petition come from the communities of Kamsack and Kenora. I do so present. Thank you.
Recognize the member for Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present a petition calling for critical supports for survivors of domestic violence. Mr. Speaker, the individuals signing this petition today wish to bring to our attention the following. Saskatchewan has the highest rates of domestic violence amongst all of the provinces in Canada, and employers should be obligated to reasonably accommodate survivors of domestic violence in the workplace. Employees who are survivors of domestic violence should be able to take a leave of absence from their employment with pay and without penalty. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Legislative Assembly to pass legislation providing critical supports for survivors of domestic violence. Mr. Speaker, this is what we called for in our private member's bill, which seeks to provide 5 paid days leave, very similar to what you see in other provinces. Mr. Speaker, it's time for the Sask Party to step up, do the right thing, and pass that legislation. Mr. Speaker, the individuals signing the petition today come from Saskatoon. I do so present.
Recognize the member for Regina Northeast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present a petition calling for real action to fight climate change. Mr. Speaker, the students who signed this petition were some of the hundreds of students who gathered here on the steps of this building to demand real action on climate change. They want to bring to our attention that Saskatchewan has the highest per person emissions, greenhouse gas emissions in all of Canada, Mr. Speaker. They want to bring to our attention that instead of tackling climate change and reducing Saskatchewan's emissions, the Saskatchewan Party government slashed programs and funding for the environment and set our province on a backwards course. And they want to bring our attention to the fact that this is reflected in the fact that payments under our Provincial Disaster Assistance Program, Mr. Speaker, have been steadily increasing with climate change. Mr. Speaker, we don't need Justin Trudeau's carbon tax, but we do need real and immediate action on climate change. Mr. Speaker, in the prayer, the petitioners respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan enact a real plan and allocate appropriate funding in the provincial budget to tackle climate change by reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, by helping families transition to energy-efficient homes, and encouraging everyone in our province to take real action to protect the environment. Mr. Speaker, the students signing this petition are from Pilot Butte and Regina. I so present.
As a member for Prince Albert Northcote.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy today to present petitions calling for the restoration of the rental housing supplement. Mr. Speaker, the cold-hearted cut to the rental housing supplement has affected thousands of families in this province, and it was a bad decision from this government to cut a program without having another available program for families who are struggling with the increased costs of living. I'll read the undersigned residents of the province of Saskatchewan want to bring these following points to your attention, Mr. Speaker. That the Sask Party cut to the rental housing supplement shows more of the same from the Sask Party, whose cuts continually hurt the most vulnerable in Saskatchewan. That the rental housing supplement helped people living with disabilities and low-income families pay their rent. That this cut comes after previous Sask Party cuts to the SED program that have already affected hundreds and left people living with disabilities with fewer supports. And that the Sask Party continues to throw hundreds of millions of dollars to their pet projects like the GTH, and it is wrong and unfair that at the same time they continue to cut the most vulnerable and make life harder for so many Saskatchewan families. Mr. Speaker, I'll read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Sask Party government to immediately restore the Saskatchewan Rental Housing Supplement. Mr. Speaker, this has been a program that helped individuals across this province, and many people across this province are concerned, and these petitions have been signed by individuals from Saskatoon, Martensville, Dundurn, Regina, Prince Albert, North Battleford, Moose Jaw, Cupar, Kenora, Yorkton, Fort Capel, Battleford, La Ronge, Osler, Kenneson, and Waka, right across Saskatchewan. I do so present.
Here.
Reading and receiving petitions. Statements by members. Recognize the member for Lumsden.
Speaker, Christmas is the day to remember God's gift to man, but Easter is when he unpacked it for us. I'm a farmer, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate ag illustrations. And Jesus once said that unless a grain of wheat is planted in the ground and dies, it remains just a grain of wheat. But if it is planted, it dies in the ground, germinates, and brings new life. That's a very simple concept, Mr. Speaker, and I'm quite sure Jesus wasn't giving us mere farm facts when he said it. The little baby that was born at Christmas time was not the end gift, Mr. Speaker. The fulfillment was not in his birth, but in his death. His death was a necessary evil to bring about hope for new life through his resurrection. Humanity had a problem of sin that none of us could deal with, so God sent his Son to solve it for us. On the cross that Good Friday, he paid a debt he did not owe, because I owed a debt I could not pay. Now, you know, Mr. Speaker, that I'm not the most religious person in the world, but I'm proud to be able to stand here today and say that I do have faith. And on the day you finally lay this old seed in the ground, Mr. Speaker, I'll be okay, because Jesus went first and he lives. Happy Easter to you and yours, Mr. Speaker, to all members of this honorable assembly, and to your families.
I see you member for Prince Albert Northcote.
Mr. Speaker, every year since 1985, the members of this Assembly have taken the time to mark April 28th as the International Day of Mourning for workers injured or killed on the job. It's an important time to remember the workers who have lost their lives, but also a time for us as legislators to ensure we're doing everything we can to make Saskatchewan a place where there are no work-related deaths or injuries. A private member's bill in the House of Commons made April 28th the official day of mourning across Canada in 1991. This will mark the 28th year of our whole nation standing with workers around the world to remember those who are killed or injured at work. We know that here in Saskatchewan there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to make sure all our workers make it home safe at the end of each shift. Too many workers are hurt on the job each year, Mr. Speaker, and the numbers are even more alarming for young and inexperienced workers. Since we marked the day of mourning last year, another 48 workers have lost their lives. It's for those 48 families that we have to do so much more to reduce workplace injuries in every part of our province. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members to join me in recognizing International Day of Mourning and to keep making progress to bringing an end to work-related injuries and deaths in Saskatchewan. Thank you.
Recognize the member for Kenora-Pelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, April 20th to 27th is National Immunization Awareness Week. During this week, we recognize the success of vaccines in Canada. Mr. Speaker, immunizations are incredibly important. They have saved the lives of more infants and children than any other medical intervention in the past 60 years. Vaccines are not only protect you, they also protect others that you care about, your family, your friends, and your co-workers. Mr. Speaker, our province offers a comprehensive package of publicly funded vaccines. We invest more than $15 million each year in immunization programs for children and people at risk, and free flu shots for those 6 months and older. And Mr. Speaker, the good work here in Saskatchewan shows we have good coverage rates for many vaccinations. However, recent breakout of vaccinated diseases across North America and the world show that we must continue to be diligent. Thanks to the good work of our health profession, professionals and engaged citizens like Ian here today, I am confident that we can continue to ensure the levels remain high. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members to join me in acknowledging Immunization Week and encourage our residents to take advantage of free vaccines offered to our province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
As a member for Regina Northeast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was pleased to attend the provincial 4-H public speaking competition last Saturday in Lancer, along with the member from Cypress Hills. 32 young people from all over Saskatchewan came to compete, and I want to congratulate Addison Payne, Hannah Hoberg, Martina Bossy, and McKenna Heidecker, who earned first place in their age groups, along with all of the other youths who demonstrated outstanding public speaking abilities. Mr. Speaker, the 4-H'ers here with us today are here to participate in Citizenship Day, which was created to immerse 4-H members in the practical workings of politics, parliamentary procedure, and the fine art of debate, which they will hopefully get to see and experience today, but probably not until after our proceedings adjourn. Later today, Mr. Speaker, these young people will conduct their own debates on topics of interest that they have chosen themselves. This event used to be called 4-H at the Legislature, but is now expanded to include other levels of government. And next spring, the 4-H'ers who get to go will sit in with Saskatoon City Council to observe municipal politics. Mr. Speaker, 4-H is an incredible leadership development program for young people, and I hope to see some of them that are up in the gallery down on the floor of this Assembly someday. I'm pleased that 4-H still receives the support of the Ministry of Agriculture, and I remember fondly my many years in 4-H, and I ask all members to join with me in recognizing the important work of 4-H.
As a member for Saskatoon University.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on April 11th, I, along with the Minister, attended the 30th Annual Saskatchewan Tourism Awards of Excellence Gala. This gala celebrates the dynamic tourism operators and businesses that epitomize hospitality and leadership in the tourism industry. The Rookie of the Year award went to Wheatland Express from Cudworth, Waka area. The Service Excellence Award was given to Harvest Eatery in Shaunavon. Mr. Speaker, the Tourism Employee of the Year was awarded to Brenda Peterson, a dedicated employee of Grasslands National Park. The Employer of the Year was awarded to Gold Eagle Casino in North Battleford. Watrous Manitou Marketing Group was awarded the Fred Heald Tourism Ambassador Award, while Kinder Surprises Antiques of Davidson won the Gil Cardiner Marketing Award. Robin and Arlene Carpin won the Travel Media Award, and the Tourism Builder Award was given to Randy Furnetz, Scott Ford, and Shan Gowan. Mr. Speaker, Wanuskewin Heritage Park won the Indigenous Tourism Experience Award. Community Event of the Year went to Taste of Maple Creek Festival, and the 2018 WBSC Junior Men's World Softball Championship won Marquee Event of the Year. Over the Hill Orchards and Winery won Small Business of the Year, and Regina Exhibition Association won Large Business of the Year. Congratulations to all the winners. Thank you for your passion and continuous efforts to promote Saskatchewan as the best place to visit in Canada. Thank you.
As a member for Saskatoon Westview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in the House today to recognize April 17th as Talk with Our Kids About Money Day. We believe that the financial education of our children should start early. Talking with children about money is the first step to improving their financial capability and enabling them to make confident financial decisions throughout their lives. Talk with Our Kids About Money is a national movement of the Canadian Foundation for Economic Education that aims to raise awareness about financial health and financial literacy. As more and more of our youth are faced with increasingly complex financial decisions, learning the basics of financial literacy is an important tool for success. Financial literacy is more than just dollars and coins, Mr. Speaker. It's understanding the concepts that will allow children to develop strategies to deal with real-world choices that they will face throughout their lives. That is why last spring, our government announced that financial literacy courses will be made available to all Saskatchewan students in grades 7 to 12. The ability to manage personal finances is an essential skill, and these courses will help ensure Saskatchewan students are prepared for a successful future. I encourage all members to join me in recognizing Talk with Our Kids About Money Day and the importance of ensuring that Saskatchewan students understand the basic principles of financial literacy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member for Swift Current.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We now know exactly what the NDP thinks of Saskatchewan voters. At a meeting last week in Weyburn, the member for Regina Northeast told NDP supporters that, quote, people don't vote using their heads. And in case anyone thinks that he just misspoke, the NDP leader doubled down on that insulting comment by tweeting, quote, Jens is right. The member for Regina Northeast explained that comment by saying that the NDP has to be relatable and that they should relate to voters by understanding their fears. Mr. Speaker, that tells you everything you need to know about the NDP. They don't think Saskatchewan voters use their heads and that they can appeal to voters through fear. That explains why the NDP leader would smear a rally of hardworking Saskatchewan men and women who were simply standing up for Saskatchewan as anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim, and anti-immigrant. Mr. Speaker, this NDP leader promised to be different, but instead he's doubled down on the most disturbing parts of the NDP playbook because he thinks fear works and that people don't vote using their heads. But, Mr. Speaker, there is good news, and that is that Saskatchewan voters are a whole lot smarter than the NDP thinks. They do use their heads when they vote, and they don't fall for the NDP's scare tactics. That's why in 2007, hope beat fear, and it's been beating fear ever since. Hear, hear, hear.
Before we move into today's proceedings, I need to address the Assembly on a matter arising from yesterday's proceedings. While I was pleased that the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre took the initiative to stand, apologize, and withdraw his egregiously unparliamentary language, I must address the content of the apology. Yesterday's Hansard clearly shows that the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre used a specific expletive in what was supposed to be an apology for unparliamentary language. Apologies are not excuses to re-offend. The use of unparliamentary language in an apology is absolutely unacceptable. The use of an expletive is even worse. This is not the standard of conduct that the citizens of this fine province deserve of their elected members. The decorum we show in this Assembly is not merely out of respect for each other, it is instead an expression of the respect we all owe the constituents we represent. As a Speaker, I cannot allow the matter to stand. I ask members to be mindful of this and to be respectful to the institution they serve. Question period. Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Sask Power bought $25 million of land at the GTH at the direction of Bill Boyd, just in time to fund his controversial East Parcels land deal. At every turn in this sorry GTH saga, we've seen decisions made by the Sask Party that use public dollars to advance their own interests instead of the interests of Saskatchewan ratepayers and the people of the province. Mr. Speaker, how are we supposed to have any confidence today that the $67 million Sask Power has now announced they'll be spending at the GTH is done with the public interest at heart, and that it's not just another expensive cover story for the GTH debacle manufactured with public dollars, with Crown dollars, at the direction of Executive Council?
Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of the Environment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think the member opposite and the people of Saskatchewan can feel assurance in terms of the plan that Sask Power has moving forward, because first and foremost, Sask Power has a board of directors that have a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders, to the people of Saskatchewan, and they have approved these plans moving forward, Mr. Speaker, as have the executive of Sask Power, Mr. Speaker. These are not decisions that have been made by one individual at any time in the past, and certainly not today, Mr. Speaker. These are plans that are looking at the footprint of Sask Power, particularly in the city of Regina, Mr. Speaker, that ultimately will save Sask Power customers $1 million a year and ensure that the nearly 1,600 people employed by Sask Power in the city of Regina, rather than working out of more than a dozen different locations, will be working out of 6 different locations over the next decade, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, these are decisions that have been approved by the board, have been approved by the management, and certainly have the the support of the government.
Hear, hear.
I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday I asked the Premier about the recommendations that he'd received in a report from the 60s Scoop Indigenous Society of Saskatchewan. We wanted to know if there'd been any action taken on those recommendations, in particular, the recommendation to introduce a task force. Instead of a response, we got a bizarre answer from the Minister of Social Services, who tried to suggest that NDP members weren't interested in this process because we weren't attending events that we weren't just not invited to, but that when those survivors themselves invited us, they were told to stop. Mr. Speaker, that was a bizarre response.
Yeah,
but it also left no answer whatsoever from the Premier on why has he not moved forward with that task force. August 31st, 2019 is coming very soon. If people don't have their records by that date, we will see Saskatchewan people who deserve compensation left without because of inaction on this government.
Hear, hear.
When will that task force be declared and get to work?
Hear, hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Government Relations.
Mr. Speaker, our 60 Scoop Indigenous Society of Saskatchewan supplied the Ministry with a report that was designed to help form the apology. The Premier delivered that apology January 7, 2019, and that had significant value to the majority of participants as they continually tell us of the value that it's had to them. In the spirit of reconciliation, the government remains committed to an ongoing dialogue on this issue, as well as moving towards identifying the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action. Many government MLAs attended these sharing circles. 26 of the 34 recommendations directed at the provinces are already being supported by a number of initiatives across the various ministries. We're also acting on 5 recommendations not directed to the province. We will continue to build on the initiatives that support Aboriginal and Métis people and culture. And this includes teaching First Nations and Métis histories in schools, providing $6 million to the Joint Task Force to improve education and employment outcomes for Aboriginals. In addition, the Ministry of Social Services remains committed to working with First Nations and Métis in order to provide the best adoption and welfare services, including this work is also going to include consideration for adopted adults and birth parents to access birth record information. This also includes you.
Next question. Recognize Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, while not so bizarre as the response we got yesterday, there was no answer to the direct question. And in fact, there's still some pretty strange response in that, as though the 60 Scoop survivors were just to give that report, to advise the apology, and that was the end of things. But that is not what they were led to believe, and that is not what that report contained. That report contained a long list of very specific recommendations, that emerged from that process. And the key recommendation, the top priority recommendation, was to have a task force so that by August 31st, everyone would have the records. This government should be heading out, looking for everyone who was part of the 60 Scoop, making sure they've got the support. Instead, they've done nothing to even help those who are coming forward, asking for those records, that information themselves. When will we see that task force established? It should have been long ago.
Hear, hear.
I recognize the Minister of Government Relations.
Mr. Speaker, the apology was designed to help those who have been affected by the 60 Scoop be able to move forward in their lives. And we've got many positive responses that have come from 60 Scoop participants. I'll give you an example. I'm going to quote Robert Doucette. I waited 56 years for this apology, Doucette said. I heard the Premier say he was sorry, and there was acknowledgement of the harms that they perpetrated on First Nations and Métis children, and I appreciate that. End of quote. Mr. Speaker, we heard from Eileen Randell, and I quote, as he said, sorry, there was something in my heart that was so true and genuine, I felt the healing, but it's a process. End of quote. Mr. Speaker, that apology was meant to support those that were involved in the 60 Scoop, and I believe that has been provided.
Hear, hear.
I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The apology was important. It had to happen, but words are not enough.
Right.
And sorry only counts if the behavior stops. We still have a broken child welfare system, and we still have a minister who refuses to answer a very simple question: where's the task force that was asked for, that is needed so that everyone has their records by August 31st?
Here, here.
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we are working with the 60 survivor group, 60 Scoop survivor group, to retain all of these records. Mr. Speaker, of all the requests that have come in the last 2 years, we've been able to dig up and be able to find 85% of those records. The 15% of the records that haven't been found, Mr. Speaker, some of them are based on timelines, some of them have been destroyed. The retention schedules years ago was not as good as it is right now, Mr. Speaker, but we will endeavour to make sure that any records that anybody requests from social services will be provided them in a timely manner. And I've also been told, Mr. Speaker, in order for them to start their application process with the federal government, all of their records don't need to be intact. So if they do need to start their application process, Mr. Speaker, I would ask them to start the process, and we'll continue to work with them to be able to locate their records. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good job.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just to be very clear, that doesn't come near what the 60 Scoop Survivors Group asked for in terms of a task force, in terms of an active approach to seeking out these records. And what we see in the minister's answers is part of a pattern of engaging with community groups, but in a half-hearted way. They failed to follow through on the recommendations and tried to say, oh, those recommendations were just to form an apology. No further action. What an embarrassing response. And we've seen a similar response when it comes to gang violence. We're joined today by Shane Partridge and Kim Bowden from Straight Up. And this is an organization well known to people across the province that helps to address the serious problems with gangs and gang violence. Several months ago, Mr. Speaker, the Sask Party connected with Straight Up and said we need a gang violence strategy. It was meant to be a joint venture. They were led to believe they would be partners in this process. Mr. Speaker, Straight Up said great, and they went ahead and they put together an excellent gang strategy that could be very useful, and they brought it forward. And what has the response been? Nothing. No offer of support, no offer of funding. We've got a strategy here ready to be used. Why won't the Sask Party work with Straight Up to put it in place, help people get out of gangs, and help keep our communities safer?
Recognize the Minister of Corrections and Policing.
Mr. Speaker, I do think it needs to be said that that we know, the government knows, that gangs are driving the rates of violence and the supply of illegal drugs in our community. That is why we recently signed an agreement with the federal government that will provide over $12 million over 5 years to implement a gang violence reduction strategy, including $1 million this year. Of this $1 million, over $200,000 will be allocated in targeted microgrants to enhance existing prevention and reintegration programming throughout our province. Over $800,000 of that $1 million will go to community-based groups for prevention and intervention. Mr. Speaker, I could go on, but I do want to say that the report was received by the Government of Saskatchewan. We are reviewing the report and looking at the recommendations, and in due course, we'll have a response to those recommendations. Thank you.
Recognize the member for Regina Douglas Park.
Speaker, unfortunately, the minister did not respond as to why the Sask Party left Straight Up hanging. A province-wide gang strategy that emphasizes prevention and intervention would keep people out of gangs and provide hope for some of our province's most vulnerable people. And it needs a provincial dollar commitment, not just a federal dollar commitment. Committing to a comprehensive strategy would not only make our communities safer and save lives, it would reduce costs in our jails, hospitals, and in policing in the long run. Will this government take action to address our serious gang and crime problem and commit to funding a province-wide gang strategy that's so badly needed today? And again, Mr. Speaker, not just federal dollars, but provincial dollars as well.
I recognize the Minister of Corrections and Policing.
Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, that this report that's been provided by the organization of Straight Up, with funds from the provincial and federal government, we're having a look at it. We just got it this week, Mr. Speaker. So we're having a close look at it. What does that say about us to just accept a report without going through the recommendations, Mr. Speaker? The provincial gang strategy, or gang violence strategy, will focus on prevention, suppression, and intervention efforts, including coordination and cooperation between law enforcement, corrections, communities, and other partners, implementing new evidence-based intensive community outreach programs, increasing anti-gang offender programming in our correctional facilities, reprioritizing specific policing resources to target gangs and gang violence, enhancing resources to prosecute individuals involved in gang-related crime. The gang violence strategy will also work in parallel with the great work done by community organizations in the province, including Straight Up. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
As a member for Regina Douglas Park.
Mr. Speaker, Straight Up has worked with 67 communities across the province and has laid the essential groundwork for getting a strategy off the ground. The communities consulted expressed interest in having Straight Up coordinate these efforts, and the Minister herself has acknowledged the organization's expertise. This is very important work that can't be done with just one-time grants, donations, and volunteers. The federal government has come to the table with funding and is meeting with Straight Up to explore solutions to address the gun and crime crisis in our communities. Why should Saskatchewan people need to wait years for the government to fund a gang prevention strategy that's needed today?
Recognize the Minister of Corrections and Policing.
Mr. Speaker, yes, the government of Saskatchewan partnered with the federal government to ask Straight Up to do a report on gang violence prevention strategy, but we need time to look at the recommendations. When the government of Saskatchewan is prepared to issue RFP and a request for proposals from the community, Straight Up is just as able to apply for the funding for specific initiatives that the government will be undertaking, Mr. Speaker. Again, the report will inform the decision of the government moving forward. We're going to take the time to look at the report.
Hear, hear. As a member for Saskatoon Centre.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the people of Pine House deserve to know why it took years for the government to act on their concerns. The Minister of Government Relations did the right thing last December by finally investigating the failings identified by the Privacy Commissioner. But why did it take so long? We know very little happened through the Finance Minister's tenure in government relations, but the torch was passed in 2017, and by that November, ministry officials were indicating, and I quote, "The minister may be getting to the point where he would consider an option," end of quote. A letter of non-compliance was written to the village. The village's response was deemed incomplete, but still no inspection until last December. Why did it take so long for this government to finally investigate this matter?
As a Minister of Government Relations.
Mr. Speaker, as we've indicated before, municipalities are a level of government that have their own duly elected councils. We always work with municipalities on working through issues that they may have in compliance issues to ensure that we can get them back into compliance. Ultimately, we found through the Office of the Information Privacy Commissioner that this municipality was not interested in achieving compliance, so therefore we put forward the inspection. Now, with the inspection, we found we need to have a few more answers to some of the questions we've got within that inspection report. We've now initiated an inquiry. That inquiry is now in the process, and we hope to have it completed shortly.
As a member for Saskatoon Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To pretend this is simply a matter of capacity and reminding councils of their legal obligations, when villagers watched as multiple boxes of documents were incinerated in a burning barrel back in 2015 in broad daylight while FOI requests were pending and later denied, is an insult to the intelligence of everyone involved. This government promised to be the most transparent in the history of this province, and yet has stood by as very serious financial and regulatory problems went unanswered. Given the connections between the Sask Party and the Council, people are right to ask, Why wasn't this taken seriously? And again, why did it take so long for this government to finally investigate? And what is the minister doing now to ensure that no community need to wait years for serious financial problems to be investigated?
I recognize the Minister of Government Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's fairly obvious that we take this concern very seriously as we've initiated an inspection. As we have done in a very few rare circumstances, we've had to go that route, but we have initiated an inspection. From that inspection, we have taken some steps. We've appointed a supervisor now to remain with that community for a year. We're currently working on developing an audit strategy for the community. So I believe those are indications that we do, on this side, take issues regarding governance within our municipalities seriously. However, we would like the municipalities to try and work through these issues as they can on their own. Providing that they can't get to that point, we do step in, and I do want to ensure that as a very rare circumstance, we take that point of stepping into a municipality's affairs.
As a member for Saskatoon Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, the July 2016 letter from 34 concerned Pine House citizens outlined a very simple fix to the problems that have plagued the efforts to get to the bottom of the problems at Pine House Village over the past several years. The lack of teeth in the local FOI Act that denies the Commissioner the power to order documents to be made public. We called for these changes last May. Once again, will the Minister of Justice commit to this very simple and necessary fix to ensure the openness, transparency, and accountability that Saskatchewan people expect?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, there's provisions in the existing legislation, the Freedom of Information Act, the LA FOIP Act, that provide for processes to get access to the courts where information is declined. There's often legitimate and serious reasons why information can't be released to the public because it involves personnel issues or issues regarding public tendering or a variety of things. So there needs to be a process to be dealing with those issues. That exists in both those pieces of legislation. Mr. Speaker, we have periodic meetings with the Privacy Commissioner, and we're going to continue to have meetings with them to determine whether the processes are working adequately, whether our citizens are being protected, and information that should be released is released in a proper, professional, and timely manner. And Mr. Speaker, that is what we believe is taking place now. And clearly, if there were things that were not taking place as they should at Pine House or in any other municipality, allow the process to take its course. And the matter is currently under review. We are looking forward to Mr. Robertson's report being released, Mr. Speaker.
As a member for Saskatoon Centre.
You know, I wasn't sure if the minister was referring to the burning barrel as a process and as one of the steps. But even leaving aside the all-expense-paid fishing trips, this government's coziness with the members of Pine House Village Council is well known. The northern village of Pine House and the current and former members of some of the village council have donated thousands of dollars to the Sask Party, and their company, Pine House Business North, sponsored a Sask Party youth convention. And we know, Mr. Speaker, in this house, the minister or the member for Regina Rochdale, he praised on the leadership here one day as they were introduced. How are Saskatchewan people supposed to believe that the close relationships between the Sask Party, MLAs and ministers, and Pine House have nothing to do with the kid glove treatment they got or they're getting when enforcing the law?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, maybe the members opposite need a map. Regina Rochdale, Pine House, nowhere near each other.
Yeah, right.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know where the members go to, but whenever they're not getting what they want, they do one of two or three things. They ask for a law, or else they ask they want to change something else, or they get down in the ditch and start smearing the members on this side of the House. Mr. Speaker, some of the things that are coming from the members opposite, they ought to stand in their place today and apologize. Mr. Speaker, this is simply unacceptable for the members opposite. They've got an obligation to do a better job for the public, a better job for each other, and Mr. Speaker, I'd like to give them the opportunity to stand in their place and apologize for smearing and slagging good members on this side of the House.
As a member for Regina Rosemont.
Mr. Speaker, this government's decision to raise and expand the PST is hurting people in our economy, and it's hit hotels and restaurants extremely hard. According to Jim Bentz from the Saskatoon Hotel and Hospitality Association, 12 members, 12 local businesses across Saskatchewan closed in March alone. These are folks who are, as he says, quote, hoteliers and restaurateurs who were once proud to say that they got bloodied knuckles from door knocking for the SAS party, are wondering why they're now alone in the arena as they fight for their very existence. He told CTV News, it's desperate out there now in rural and secondary communities and even in the urban communities with all the different things that are eroding the revenues, end quote. Will the minister commit to work with the hotel and restaurant owners to make sure more businesses don't have to say last call and hang closed signs for good? Will she remove the PST that the SAS party government imposed on restaurants across Saskatchewan?
Recognize the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In answer to the first question, yes, I just met with Mr. Bentz yesterday. So yes, we're working with the industry and people within the industry. As far as restaurant meals go up, we are pleased to see that that is recovered and the stats show an increase. And through the conversation with Mr. Bentz, it was well recognized the two major factors affecting many of these establishments are the economy, to be sure, Mr. Speaker, so that's why we'd look forward to the members opposite engaging in the fact that the economy is seriously important to this province and get on board for some of our initiatives for the economy, which does not include increasing the corporate income tax, which will affect these very same businesses. I don't think the members opposite have told these businesses when they meet with them that what they plan on doing is increase their business taxes. Yep. The other, Mr. Speaker, was the changes to the drinking and driving laws, and I think they support that, as does society, but it does affect the drinking in these businesses.
Yes.
As the member for Regina Douglas Park.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday I asked the minister about passing our Bill 614, which would provide paid leave for survivors of domestic violence. The minister suggested that the survivor whose story I shared should meet with him directly. Mr. Speaker, the minister should understand why a survivor who has returned to her abuser would not want to out herself or her employer at this vulnerable time in her life. Mr. Speaker, this is exactly why this legislation needs to be passed. This legislation would help survivors like this woman today. The minister said yesterday he's still looking at this, but he's been looking at this for 2 years. The time to act is now. Will the minister commit to passing the bill today?
I recognize the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I think members on both sides of the House have got the deepest sympathy for anybody that's gone through a domestic violence situation. We're going to continue to do the review and analysis. The paid leave is not offered on either of the provinces on either side of us. Sometimes this is something where we want to be the leader, and we are undergoing the consultation as we speak, Mr. Speaker, and that's the direction we're going to go to. Our province will continue to work to provide supports for people that are survivors of domestic violence. The first time a new transition house was opened in Saskatchewan was the one that was opened in Melfort. There has not been one opened prior to that since 1989. We provide $11.9 million for interpersonal violence and abuse services. We take those things seriously, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue to do that. The NDP did not open any transition houses during their term. We did, and we're going to continue to provide supports and work through things in a comprehensive and careful manner, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the point the member made.
Ministerial statements. Introduction of bills. Recognize the member for Regina Rosemont.
The clerk says. Got the bill? Mr. Speaker, I move that bill number 616, the Sick Heritage Month Act be now introduced and read a first time.
It's been moved by the member that Bill number 616 be now introduced and read a first time. Is the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried.
First reading of this bill.
When shall this bill be read a second time? I recognize the member.
Next sitting of the Assembly.
Next sitting. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. I recognize the Chair of the Standing Committee on Human Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am instructed by the Standing Committee on Human Services to report Bill number 139, the Foreign Worker Recruitment and Immigration Services Amendment Act 2018, without amendment.
When shall this bill be considered in Committee of the Whole on Bills? I recognize the Minister.
I request leave to waive consideration in Committee of the Whole on this bill, and this bill be now read the third time.
The Minister has requested leave to waive consideration in Committee of the Whole on Bill number 139 and that the bill be now read a third time. Is leave granted? Minister may proceed to move third reading. Recognize Minister.
I move that this bill be now read the third time and passed under its title.
It's been moved by the Minister that Bill number 139 be now read the third time and passed under its title. Is the Assembly ready for the question? Pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
Third reading of this bill.
Recognize the Chair of the Standing Committee on Human Services.
Mr. Speaker, I am instructed by the Standing Committee on Human Services to report Bill number 153, Saskatchewan Employment Leaves Amendment Act 2018, without amendment.
When shall this bill be considered in Committee of the Whole on Bills? I recognize the Minister.
Request leave to waive consideration in Committee of the Whole on this bill, and the bill be now read the third time.
Minister has requested leave to waive consideration in Committee of the Whole on Bill number 153 and that the bill be now read a third time. Is leave granted? Minister may proceed to move third reading.
I move that this bill be now read the third time and passed under its title.
It's been moved by the Minister that Bill number 153 be now read a third time and passed under its title. Is the Assembly ready for the question? Pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
Third reading of this bill.
Recognize the Chair of the Standing Committee on Human Services.
Mr. Speaker, I am instructed by the Standing Committee on Human Services to report Bill number 165, the Workers' Compensation Amendment Act 2018, with amendment.
When shall this bill be considered in Committee of the Whole on Bills? I recognize the Minister.
I request leave to waive consideration in Committee of the Whole on this bill, and that the bill and its amendments be now read the third time.
The Minister has requested leave to waive consideration in Committee of the Whole on Bill number 165 and that the bill and its amendments be now read a third time. Is leave granted? When shall the amendments be read a first time? I recognize the Minister.
I move that the amendments be now read a first and second time, Mr. Speaker.
It has been moved by the Minister that the amendments be now read a first and a second time. Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried.
First and second reading of the amendments.
The Minister may proceed to move third reading. Recognize the Minister.
I move that the bill be now read the third time and passed under its title.
It's been moved by the Minister that Bill number 165 be now read the third time and passed under its title. Is the Assembly ready for the question? Pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
Third reading of this bill.
Recognize Government House Leader.
Ask for leave to move a motion.
Government House Leader has asked leave to move a motion. Is leave granted? Recognize Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I move that notwithstanding Rule 24, Sub 10, the rotation for private members' day business for the remainder of the spring period of the parliamentary calendar for the third session of the 28th Legislature shall be as follows. 1. Thursday, May 2nd, opposition, 75-minute debate and government priority item. Item 2. Thursday, May 9th, government, 75-minute debate and opposition priority item. I so move.
Is the Assembly ready for the question? Pledge the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried. Recognize Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that this House do now adjourn so all the members can go home and enjoy Easter with their families.
It's been moved that this Assembly do now adjourn. Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt that motion? Carried. Pursuant to Rule 6, Sub 3, this Assembly stands adjourned until Monday, April the 29th at 1:30 p.m.